Each of us has been piecing together this story from fragments of information from a bunch of disparate sources. But what if we put all of those fragments together? What if we retold the story from the very beginning with everything we've learned to date? What would that version of the story look like?
July 16, 2025 at 1634 and 17 seconds.
Nassau County 911. What's your emergency?
Oh my God, there's a man trapped in our MRI scanner with a chain around his neck. We're trying, but we can't get him out, and I think he's being choked. Please send paramedics, hurry.
I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?
He went limp in my arms. I just can't believe. I still trying to wrap my head around the whole thing. He waved goodbye to me, and then his whole body went limp.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the conference. My name is Tobias Gilk. I'd like to thank you for joining me so early on the first day. I'm about to play for you a video that shows the horrific MRI accident that occurred just a few months ago in New York. Now, while the video isn't graphic, there's not blood and gore, I will say that it's impactful, and it's something that you can't unsee once you've seen it. Now, if you'd rather not watch, I completely understand.
Just so you know, that video you're about to show, that's me.
Could you repeat that?
I am the tech in that video you're about to play.
Hello, and welcome back to the Invisible Force podcast. This podcast series is built around exploring MRI incidents and accidents that often get described incorrectly in local news or in online stories as freak accidents. Our entire first season is dedicated to an accident you've already heard about in the news and on this podcast, about a man who died in an MRI accident out on Long Island, New York, a few months ago in July of 2025. In this accident, Mr. Keith McAllister died after he got pulled into an MRI scanner by a 20-pound chain around his neck. This happened at Nassau Open MRI. Before we pick up our story from the prior episodes, this is a great time to reintroduce you to the co-hosts for the podcast.
I'm John Posh, MRI technologist, educator, and longtime advocate for MRI safety practices. I'm also adjunct faculty at 2 universities and teach safety multiple times per year.
And I'm Toby Gilk, certified MR safety officer, certified MR safety expert, MR facility architect and safety consultant. I also am a co-author of a recent MRI safety textbook, The Technologist's MRI Safety Handbook. Now, in our first 4 episodes, what we called Act 1, those were all about the specific events of the accident. What happened, who responded, and what happened immediately after, at least what news we could gather from the press. In the next 4 episodes, our Act 2, this is where we dove into the various key players in this mystery. This episode, episode 9, begins our final act, Act 3, part of this series, in which we bring everything together that we've learned so far about the events surrounding this accident and hopefully wrap up with a clear indication of the direction towards safer future for MRI. This episode begins Act 3 with us piecing the entire event together again, now informed by all of our investigations, into a more comprehensive picture of what happened.
So let's start by recounting that day, July 16th, 2025, and after the break, we'll talk about what's happened since. So on Wednesday afternoon, Miss Adrienne Jones McAllister went to Nassau Open MRI for an MRI of her knee. She was accompanied by her husband, Mr. Keith McAllister. Now, not only wasn't this her first MRI, it wasn't even her first MRI at Nassau Open MRI. Both Miss Jones McAllister and the MRI tech have both stated she'd been there several times before. And both have said that Mr. McAllister had been there with her at least a couple of times prior to this episode.
Now, Mr. McAllister was into physical fitness. Now, in my neighborhood, you'll see a lot of soccer moms out there power walking with their weighted vests or rucksacks. Mr. McAllister had a more utilitarian version of that. He had a length of heavy-duty industrial chain inside a fabric sleeve that he wore around his neck, the kind of chain you might use to lock up a motorcycle or a scooter. The two ends of the chain were closed with a heavy-duty lock. People have used images of Flavor Flav with his oversized chains and the big clock medallion as an image for reference. And while that might be a bit exaggerated, it's actually not too terribly far off from what it looked like in the video of the accident.
Now, not only was the MRI technologist who ran the MRI scanner familiar with both of the McAllisters, he was also familiar with the fact that Mr. McAllister wore a large chain. Again, Ms. Jones McAllister mentioned in her TV interview, and the MRI tech acknowledged this when he and Toby spoke when he doxed himself at the 2025 AMRIT annual meeting in September of 2025.
You'll remember that the imaging center where Mrs. Jones McAllister went was called Nassau Open MRI, so named because it's located in Nassau County, New York, which is on Long Island, a little ways from downtown Manhattan. Now, this is not to be confused with another provider, also called Nassau Open MRI, located in Nassau County, Florida. Despite the fact that the two providers share the same name, that appears to be just pure coincidence, and so far at least, we're not seeing any other relationship between these two imaging centers. As an aside, in our last episode, we told you that our Nassau Open MRI had turned their website back on. Well, apparently that was very short-lived, and they've turned it off again.
A significant majority of MRI providers, whether they're hospitals or outpatient imaging centers, have to maintain accreditation. In previous episodes, you've heard us talk not so flatteringly about how weak we think the accreditation MRI safety minimums are. But as wet noodle as they are, at least there's something, or at least someone who is supposed to be looking at the MRI safety practices. But Nassau Open MRI, the New York one, is what's sometimes referred to as a PI or personal injury imaging provider, doing a significant chunk of their work at the direction of personal injury attorneys. What they did do at the behest of attorneys, they did for a fully cash pay patients. No insurance was accepted whatsoever, not even Medicare or Medicaid.
Now, the requirements to have some sort of accreditation typically comes from accepting insurance, specifically Medicare and Medicaid. And if an imaging center doesn't accept those types of insurance payments, then there aren't any accreditation requirements.
Now, not having accreditation isn't such a big deal because as a healthcare provider, they have to be licensed by the state, right? Well, here's the problem. That's wrong on two counts. First, while the state of New York licenses doctors, nurses, dentists, physical therapists, it doesn't require healthcare licenses for all types of companies. Yes, if you're a hospital, the hospital needs to be licensed. But if you're an outpatient imaging center, then no, the state of New York has no oversight into whether you run your imaging center safely. Second, if you have an imaging device that emits ionizing radiation, the kind that created Godzilla and makes you glow in the dark, that specific device gets overseen by the state. But MRI doesn't emit that kind of radiation, which means the state simply pretends they don't exist.
So Nassau Open MRI was not accredited. It wasn't licensed at the business level, meaning there was no state oversight for the company relative to safety for patient care. And in New York, MRI scanners don't need to be registered or licensed at all, meaning nobody was monitoring this facility or the equipment for safety. Even as poorly as most of the accreditation organizations do, had they been there, they would have done something, hopefully. In addition to that, there was some evidence that the company was kind of coming apart at the seams, at least a little bit. Before the January 16th incident, the two owners of Nassau Open MRI, Brian and Jason Goldberg, who were also 50% partners in the landlord company, GM Partners Westbury, they were partners with a man named Ronald Mazza, who owned the other 50%. And it appears as though it was GM Partners who leased the whole building, so that's 50% Mazza and 50% Goldberg's, and then they sublet part of that building to Nassau Open MRI. the Goldbergs. Well, according to a lawsuit that was filed last year in May of 2025, actually 2 months before the incident, Nassau MRI apparently stopped paying its rent to GM Partners, as was the agreement. And they started going around GM Partners and paying it directly to the building owner. Well, at least before they stopped paying rent to everybody. This is all to show you that the company, Nassau Open MRI, wasn't exactly a model company with respect to good governance practices at the time that Mrs. Jones McAllister showed up for her MRI.
So on the day of her scan, Miss Jones McAllister arrives with her husband, who was wearing that heavy chain. The MRI technologist acknowledged knowing this, saying that he told Mr. McAllister that the chain would have to come off and get stored in their car if he had any thoughts of going into the MRI scanner room. Statements from the tech imply that Mr. McAllister took off the chain, but then put it back on a short while later. We didn't know if Mr. McAllister came into the MRI scanner room initially to help get his wife situated on the MRI table before the exam, but statements from the MRI tech suggest that he was just hanging out somewhere close by, potentially in the little seating area inside the semi-trailer where the MRI was located.
Whether the MRI tech completed the full exam of Mrs. McAllister's knee or whether she was in so much pain that she couldn't tolerate it and they stopped everything before it was done. From the security camera video, we know that Mr. McAllister came into the room while she was still on the MRI table, but the table had already been pulled out of the tube. In her TV interview, she said that the tech went to go and get her husband for her, but the roughly 1 minute long leaked security camera video doesn't actually show that. It shows the tech inside the room the whole time. Also, statements from Nassau Open MRI and the MRI tech make it sound like they tried to keep Mr. McAllister from entering the room. But again, the video doesn't support that either. The tech appears completely passive when Mr. McAllister walks into the room.
Now, as we described before, when Mr. McAllister walked into the room, he doesn't get dragged by the chain around his neck from across the room. In fact, with no indications of anything being different or weird, Mr. McAllister walks right alongside the elevated table or bed of the MRI scanner, right up next to his wife who's lying on her back. They reach out their hands towards one another, and when Mr. McAllister pulls on her hands, pulling her up into a seated position, while Mr. McAllister is doing this, we can see on the video the MRI tech who is on the opposite side of the table with his hands behind Miss Jones McAllister's back, supporting her up into that seated position. But as she sits up, Mr. McAllister takes a small step backwards towards the face of the donut-shaped MRI scanner. With that small change in distance, that's all the MRI's magnetic field needs to grab hold of that 20-pound chain around Mr. McAllister's neck and pull him headfirst into the tube of the MRI scanner.
In the last few seconds of the leaked video, we see Mrs. Jones McAllister pulling on her husband's belt, trying to pull him back out from the tube. And we see the MRI tech leaning into the mouth of the tube to reach in, presumably trying to pull the chain off of Mr. McAllister's neck. We had previously speculated that that chain and lock were being magnetically attracted with perhaps 1,000 pounds of force around his neck. We had an MRI service engineer suggest to us that it was probably a lot more than that. However much it was pulling from the magnetic attraction, the tech wasn't able to get it free. And it's right around this point where the security camera video ends.
What the tech reportedly said to others was that when he couldn't pull the chain off Mr. McAllister's neck, he pushed the quench button, which is a button installed with most MRI scanners that turns off the magnetic field. He said he pushed the button on the face of the scanner. Now, there is an emergency button on the face of the scanner, but it's not the quench button. The quench button is typically mounted on the wall in the scanner room or the control room, or ideally both. If he was pushing an emergency button on the face of the scanner, that was likely the e-stop button, which, given the situation, likely wouldn't have any application at all. If this is in fact what happened, it would make sense that he would have simply thought the quench button failed to work. It was probably around this time that someone from Nassau Open MRI called 911 asking for help to get Mr. McAllister out of the MRI's tube.
The MRI tech also reportedly said that he thought that if he could open the lock at the ends of the chain around Mr. McAllister's neck, that would make it easier to free him. He reportedly was asking Mrs. Jones McAllister if she had the lock or knew where it was. If they managed to find the key, it didn't exactly help get the chain off of Mr. McAllister's neck. We imagine that it was around this time that the first police officers show up to start to help. They're told to take off their gun belts and anything else metal with them or on them. And we expect that they tried reaching in the bore to pull the chain off of Mr. McAllister's neck without any success, similar to what the tech did. At some point, someone must ask if it's possible to get someone into the backside of the MRI scanner tube so that more sets of hands can try and wrestle the chain from around his neck. Remember that this MRI scanner is inside a semi-trailer, and the scanner fits the whole space of the inside of that semi-trailer, wall to wall and floor to ceiling. There's no way to simply walk around it to the backside. But to get there, the tech exits the building, goes around to the back end of the trailer, unlocks a service door, and climbs up into the back end of the semi-trailer, where he can reach into the backside of the MRI scanner tube and try and help wrestle the chain from that end.
Now, we suspect that it was around this time that they're coming up with the backdoor idea that someone from Nassau Open MRI calls Intermed, their equipment service company, to come over and hotwire the quench button and force the MRI's magnetic field to turn off. While the tech is circling around to the back end of the trailer to get into the other side of the MRI scanner, we imagine the Intermed service engineers racing across Long Island to get to Nassau Open MRI.
After a number of attempts to try and pull the chain from both ends of the MRI scanner, pull it off of Mr. McAllister's neck, after those attempts were unsuccessful, and maybe it was because the Intermed service engineer had arrived at this time, the MRI tech purportedly left the back end of the semi-trailer and was circling back around to the building entrance to come back inside as the MRI scanner purportedly quenched, finally freeing Mr. McAllister. By this point, there was a crowd of police and paramedics and firefighters who could all jump into action and get Mr. McAllister out of the MRI scanner and into an ambulance and across town to the hospital. But in some ways, this is just the beginning of the story. The Season 1 sponsor for the Invisible Force podcast is carereporting.org. That's CARE, spelled C-A-I-R-E. Carereporting.org is a confidential MRI adverse incident reporting system that's available to all of us, the public, as well as offering enterprise solutions to hospitals and imaging centers for secure, confidential reporting of MRI incidents, accidents, and near misses. If you have direct knowledge of an MRI accident that may have been swept under the rug, or if you want information on how CARE could be set up as a private, internal error reporting tool for your hospital or imaging center, carereporting.org can help you with both of those. CARE has an assembled panel of international experts in MRI safety and MRI accidents. Reports submitted to CARE either through the public website or through an enterprise system get reviewed by their experts who then deliver insights into the contributing causes of how accidents or near misses happened and, more importantly, the steps that could prevent similar accidents in the future. For more information, please visit carereporting.org. Again, that's CARE, spelled C-A-I-R-E.
So, in this episode, we're giving you a recap of what we understand happened around the fatal accident at Nassau Open MRI in July of 2025. Before the break, we told you everything that we know about what happened up to the point where they eventually whisked Mr. McAllister off to the hospital. In the second half of this episode, we're going to take you from then to the present day.
If you're just jumping in now and haven't heard us describe this accident before as fatal, Mr. McAllister was pronounced dead the following day. He reportedly died in the hospital after having had several heart attacks. Now, while there's some people on social media who jumped in with comments like, see, he wasn't injured that badly and only died because of pre-existing conditions, it's important to note that pretty often the direct cause of death is your heart stopping beating. In other words, a heart attack. But this can be secondary to all sorts of other causes that might have come from this incident. Causes such as oxygen deprivation or organ failure, or neurological damage or blood clots, and lots of other things. The fact that he died of a heart attack actually tells us very little about his injuries from that chain around his neck, other than that they were pretty significant.
The only real pieces of information that we have directly from Miss Adrienne Jones McAllister came just a day or two after the incident, and those were from an interview she gave with Long Island Channel 12 News. In that interview, she affirmed a number of facts about the incident. 1, that she and her husband had been to Nassau Open MRI before. 2, that the tech knew about them both and knew about the chain that Mr. McAllister wore around his neck. And 3, that it took nearly an hour to free Mr. McAllister. A GoFundMe appeal for funeral expenses from Miss Jones McAllister's daughter, Keith McAllister's stepdaughter, repeated the information about the time it took to get him out. Initially, we were hopeful that this would be the first of several interviews giving us first-hand account of what happened, but this interview turned out to be a one-and-done thing.
Very shortly after the airing of the interview, there was a New York Post article that announced that the family had retained Michael Lauterborn of Smith, Lauterborn & Chung, now just Lauterborn & Chung. Immediately after retaining the attorney, public comments from Mrs. Jones McAllister stopped. No more TV interviews or statements to other journalists. Strict radio silence. At the time of the accident, there were also innuendos that the quench button had malfunctioned and that this was at least a contributing cause to Mr. McAllister's death. We wound up identifying the attorneys for Siemens, which was the company that originally made the MRI scanner, and Intermed, the company that held the ongoing service contract. They had been retained in an apparent expectation of some sort of lawsuit. A few weeks after the accident, Mrs. Jones McAllister added Ben Crump, an attorney, to her legal representation. And we were sure that soon there'd be some splashy announcement about a lawsuit. But we waited, and we waited, and we waited.
Now, because someone died, this incident was investigated by the Nassau County Police Department's Homicide Unit. While we were not so patiently waiting for the news to drop any day about the lawsuit, Nassau PD had investigated and forwarded all of their information to the Nassau County District Attorney's Office. At least until now, the DA's office has declined to file any criminal charges against anyone involved. We actually sent a Freedom of Information request to the DA's office asking for the evidence or reports that were presented and got back the most cryptic response we've ever seen, something along the lines of, we can neither confirm nor deny that we're aware of any investigation or that we've chosen to or chosen not to file any charges against any persons living or dead, because that information alone could potentially compromise ongoing investigations. It was one of those letters that was so convoluted you begin questioning the nature of the reality by the time you get to the end of it.
At the same time, John and I were also trying to figure out what discussions were happening about this incident within the New York State Department of Health. Originally, in response to our questions, we were told that the Department of Health, quote, couldn't comment on ongoing investigations. Only it turned out that there was no investigation underway. They apparently felt that as though it was easier to shut us down with false confidentiality claims than to tell us that they weren't taking a preventable fatal accident at a healthcare provider, that they weren't taking that seriously. We've had a Freedom of Information request into the New York State Department of Health since December of this past year, requesting information about the incident and the Department of Health discussions about MRI safety. They previously delayed responding twice. The last time they said that they expected to have a response to us on April 20th, and then, imagine our surprise, not, when last month on the 20th, they pushed their response back another month and a half until early June. At this rate, it won't be until sometime after the next fatal MRI accident that we get the information or the materials from this one.
On October 23rd, 2025, a letter from the law firm of Hawthorne, Barber, and Gerstmann, representing Nassau Open MRI, went out to the attorneys representing all the likely parties to any potential lawsuit. A lawsuit, by the way, which still hadn't materialized at this point. In this letter, the attorneys said that Nassau Open MRI's business operations were stopping at the end of the month of October, and that the parties had only 2 days of the following week in which they could inspect the premises of the MRI scanner. The letter didn't say what was going to happen to the MRI scanner after October 31st, other than that it would be no longer available for inspection.
My suspicion is that during those last-minute inspection periods in October of 2025, someone who knows about how MRIs work probably someone acting on behalf of Siemens, looked into the log files stored on the MRI system. Now, most modern MRI scanners keep essentially an audit trail of just about everything that the MRI machine does. If it gives you an error code, it records the error as well as the date and time. If the machine is running too hot, it records that and notes the date and time. And while I'm not a technical expert on Siemens' Esprit MRI system, I'd wager a good bit of money that it also records when the e-stop or the quench button is pushed. If someone looked into the log files and saw when the last of Mrs. Jones McAllister's scans were done, and then saw 4 or 5 activations of the e-stop button 2 minutes later, and then 45 minutes later saw a single push of the quench button, well, that would be pretty direct confirmation of the story that we've been piecing together. Now, at the moment, none of the attorneys are sharing any information with us, so we don't yet have a confirmation for this hypothesis.
For the longest time, we kept wondering when there would be an actual lawsuit, or whether everyone would come to a settlement agreement prior to the necessity of filing a lawsuit, in which case there'd be zero public records of the facts about this incident, and we would have had nothing to talk about. But on April 7th, 2026, a lawsuit was filed. Apparently, at some point, Miss Jones McAllister traded Latterborn Chung and Michael Latterborn for Jacoby and Myers and Andrew Finkelstein as their choice of legal counsel. The lawsuit is filed by both Jacoby and Myers and the Ben Crump firm. The suit names Nassau Open MRI, their landlord GM Partners Westbury, and East Coast Radiology and Sun Enterprises. For all the initial fuss that the quench button had malfunctioned, the lawsuit did not name Siemens or Intermed or whoever sold the used MRI scanner and semi-trailer to Nassau Open MRI.
Which brings us back to the fighting between the owners of Nassau Open MRI and, or what they're answering the phone now is Red Tree Radiology, and the company from whom they sublet the tenant space, GM Partners. In the December 15th, 2025 suit from Mazza against Nassau Open MRI Partners, the complaint makes claims of, quote, destruction of evidence by Nassau Open MRI, destruction of evidence for the MRI accident. The suit also names Dr. Eliezer Offenbacher as a figurehead president of Nassau Open MRI. Purportedly, also the radiologist who read the studies from Nassau Open MRI. These bits are going to be pretty important in our next episode as well, so make sure you stay tuned.
As we shared in a previous episode, Nassau Open MRI's phone number is now being answered Red Tree Radiology. But the Mazza lawsuit suggests that Red Tree Radiology is just another company owned by Brian and Jason Goldberg, the owners of Nassau Open MRI. According to the new lawsuit, Red Tree was to administer and operate Nassau Open MRI. But when you call the phone number from the signs on the building asking for Nassau Open MRI, the phone is answered Red Tree Radiology. People there say that Red Tree Radiology is now a custodian for the assets of the now shuttered Nassau Open MRI. Depending on which lawsuit you look at, the 2015 complaint said that Red Tree was owned by Dr. Rigney, and the new lawsuit suggests that it's owned by the Goldbergs. It seems that Nassau Open MRI is exclusively owned by the Goldbergs, and the imaging center was being operated by Red Tree Radiology. If, as the new lawsuit suggests, Red Tree is also owned by the Goldbergs, isn't this the same thing as me moving a $20 bill from my left pocket to my right pocket and saying I don't have any more money?
So here we are, nearly a year after the event. We've been taken down a rabbit hole of the quote-unquote malfunctioning quench button that now appears maybe didn't malfunction at all. We've learned that Nassau Open MRI was actively fighting with their landlord, a company that the owners of Nassau Open MRI had a 50% stake in, and that this has resulted in a separate lawsuit in which the other party in the landlord company is accusing Nassau Open MRI of destroying evidence from the fatal MRI accident. That Nassau Open MRI and Red Tree Radiology may effectively be the same company, or at least share some of the same ownership, and that Red Tree Radiology is now somehow a custodian of Nassau Open MRI assets, and that the lawsuit from the family has finally landed in court with some new attorneys. While the presumptive cause of the incident appears to have gotten a whole lot simpler, user error instead of some highly improbable technical fault. We're starting to feel like we kind of need a corkboard the size of a small house and about 1,000 push pins and a couple hundred yards of bright red yarn to be able to make the murder board diagram of everybody involved, the individuals and the companies in the litigation on the defense side of this.
Every question we answer seems to lead to 2 or 3 new ones. Thankfully, we're not the judge in this case, charged with finding the ultimate truth, because this is just a huge mess. We haven't talked about it much since our very first episode, but our big picture mission with this podcast, apart from telling you gripping stories, is to help make MRI safer. To that end, in our next episode, we're going to break down the things we've learned about what should have been done differently, and, if we were kings for the day, who we would hold responsible. Please make sure you're subscribed so you don't miss a single episode.
July 16, 2025 at 1634 and 17 seconds.
Nassau County 911. What's your emergency?
Oh my God, there's a man trapped in our MRI scanner with a chain around his neck. We're trying, but we can't get him out, and I think he's being choked. Please send paramedics, hurry.
I'm sorry. Could you repeat that?
He went limp in my arms. I just can't believe. I still trying to wrap my head around the whole thing. He waved goodbye to me, and then his whole body went limp.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the conference. My name is Tobias Gilk. I'd like to thank you for joining me so early on the first day. I'm about to play for you a video that shows the horrific MRI accident that occurred just a few months ago in New York. Now, while the video isn't graphic, there's not blood and gore, I will say that it's impactful, and it's something that you can't unsee once you've seen it. Now, if you'd rather not watch, I completely understand.
Just so you know, that video you're about to show, that's me.
Could you repeat that?
I am the tech in that video you're about to play.
Next episode, we're going to do what I think both John and I have been itching to do from the very beginning. Identify what the standard of care is for MRI safety and what we think happened that failed to meet that standard of care, and who we think has responsible for the various parts of this incident. In our previous episodes, we promised our de facto expert witness services, and in the next episode, we'll be delivering something like that. For this week's show, our sources were the leaked security camera footage of the accident, various news accounts of the accident, as well as communications with the Nassau County PD and the Nassau County DA's office, a number of various public legal documents from people suing one another both before and after the accident, including the recent civil suit complaint from Adrian Jones McAllister against Nassau Open MRI, and a number of confidential sources. Our introductory radio play was assembled from local news coverage and also featured the voice actors Gwen Langland, Misha Stanton, and Julia Schaffini. You probably heard several of those as intros to other episodes. If you have any information about this incident or any other MRI accidents, please reach out to us through our website, invisibleforcepodcast.com. Episodes, show notes, and a tip line contact page are always available there. Also, you can leave us a voicemail with information about this incident at area code 631 MRI Tips. The number is 631 MRI Tips or 631-674-8477. Lastly, we ask you to like and share our podcast with your friends and colleagues. With your help, we'll unravel the mystery of what happened, and with a little luck, we're going to help make sure that accidents like this don't ever occur again.